Ghost of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 94 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 20 of A Clash of Kings. That's Tyrion 5.
And we're going to chat about the chapter. We're going to try not to spoil any future plot points for you. And hopefully we're going to provide you some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some reader communications. Be sure to check out our show notes. They'll provide you some additional information that'll be particularly handy if you're not reading along. How are you, Mackelly?
I'm doing just fine. How about you?
Good. I was listening to Mark Maron's podcast earlier. Not really. I don't really listen to it, but my wife does, so I sometimes overhear it.
Uh-huh.
And he was talking about how it kind of annoyed him when just like people with no talent or reason to have a podcast just make a podcast. And I was shaking my fist, I can tell you.
Who's the judge whether someone has a...
Exactly! You with your millions of listeners.
We've got our faithful handful.
We do. But it made me laugh.
Yes, that is quite funny.
Not for the first time. In these 94 episodes, I seem to have had poison ivy multiple times. But the bloody dog has given us all poison ivy this time. None of us have been doing any yard work, but the dog has run through the poison ivy, and we've all stroked the dog, and we've all got poison ivy as a result.
Oh, man. So the dog rolled in poison ivy and then gave it to you all.
She's perfectly fine.
You must have poison ivy just all over your house, your yard.
I think it's where I found that poison ivy tree last year. I think it's grown back.
Okay.
But it's a little bit awkward to get to, but she runs around underneath things and gets to it. So
right.
This is the problem. But I have taken an action item to deal with it.
And get yourself poison ivy again in the process.
Probably. Undoubtedly.
Yes, you seem to be unable to get near poison ivy without somehow getting it on your skin.
Yeah.
So I was talking to one of our fellow colleagues, Mark, and he and I were getting quite the chuckle out of what happened to him in our entire department town hall earlier. No, it was last week. It was late last week, right?
Yeah. So it was a meeting for like 75 people. And Mark gave his bit, and he did a very good job.
Yes.
Round of applause, Mark. I hope you hear this and know that we thought you did a very good job. But when Mark... So all of this, of course, is virtual. We were having a Microsoft Teams live meeting. And when he finished, it was supposed to transition over to his manager. And something went wrong on the transition. And so basically Mark was left on screen for... I'm sure what felt to Mark like about 3 hours.
It was so long. They could not get the camera off of him.
But he soldiered on. He smiled and smiled and smiled.
He sure did. He was giving it his best. You could definitely tell that smile was not entirely genuine, though.
It started genuine, but that quickly left.
Yes.
Oh,
it quickly left as the hours went by.
We laughed with him afterwards, but man, every one of us was like, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
I was telling Mark that I was afraid my microphone was on because I made a comment, and the next presenter after Mark answered my comment. And I was like, oh, am I not muted? It just so happened that like the presenter said something. I, just rhetorically to myself, gave a reply. And then the presenter went on with like as if he heard me say my response.
Weird.
I panicked because I was assumed I was on mute. So I wasn't exactly sitting quietly.
The presenters never heard anything from the crowd.
Okay,
so
good.
You're fine.
Simon was a presenter, so he would know these things.
Oh,
that was funny.
Laughed.
That was quite funny. Poor
funny.
Mark.
Yeah.
If anybody was going to weather that well, though, it would be Mark. He's got the personality to handle it.
I was thinking about that afterwards. I could not have kept the smile as long as Mark did. I mean, Mark just painted that smile on and just was like, I'm here until I'm not,
Right.
I clearly would have cracked way sooner. But I think maybe I might have done something. I might have grabbed a couple of juggling balls and sort of created created a bit of a scene.
I texted Mark while he was on screen and said, you should be trying to lip sync what the other presenter is saying right now, because they kept going on with the presentation, even though it was just Mark's face on the screen. I thought it would be fun if he just tried to lip sync whatever the next presenter was saying. Anyway.
Anyway, we have got a long one today, so let's get down to business. How did we leave Tyrion Lannister? Last time we saw Tyrion, he was laying a trap for Pycelle, Baelish and Varys, feeding each information to see what would reach Cersei's ear. The various plans involved fostering and marrying Cersei's children to various nobles to cement alliances for the war. Whichever version Cersei hears about, she's not going to like it. But Tyrion will know who the spy is.
Right.
Mackelly, why don't we give him the summary?
Okay. Tyrion visits the Guildhall of the Alchemists. Deep in its chilly bowels below the Hill of Rainies, the Pyromancer Hallyne shows Tyrion some of the latest batch of wildfire he and his fellow brethren have been cooking up at Cersei's behest. The final product is put in jars about the size of a grapefruit. According to Hallyne, they've got nearly 8,000 jars, half of which are left over from the Mad King's final days. Those older jars are even more unstable than the fresh batch. Hallyne tells Tyrion that they're so flammable that even being placed in sunlight can cause them to ignite, so anyone handling them, especially in the heat of battle, needs to be very, very careful.
Tyrion is both delighted and terrified at the realization that the Pyromancers might unexpectedly come through with their promise of 10,000 jars. He asks for a few thousand empty jars, and Hallyne agrees to give him what they can spare. Hallyne thanks Tyrion for coming and suggests he and his fellow Pyromancers be granted an audience with the king to show off some of their other wondrous and dread secrets.
Talk about your all-time bad ideas.
Yeah. Tyrion, already unnerved by Joffrey's tendency to make men fight to the death, is leery of introducing a new means of torture and torment to the young king.
When Tyrion emerges from the Guildhall, he's greeted at his litter by Bronn with a pair of urgent messages. Sir Jesselyn Bywater requests his presence at the Gate of the Gods, and he's been summoned by the Queen to her chambers. Tyrion decides to let Cersei sit and stew for a bit, figuring it'll make her angry and therefore more prone to stupidity. On their way to the gate, the litter makes its way through an empty market square that would have previously been filled with farmers selling their wares. Sir Jesselyn informs Tyrion that his cousin Cleos Frey has just arrived from Riverrun with a letter from Robb Stark.
Sir Cleos is looking haggard from his trek through the Riverlands. Even under a peace banner, they were still attacked twice by rogue bands of men. Tyrion reads Robb's peace demands and finds them unacceptable. He plans to send Cleos back to Riverrun with their own demands, hoping the back and forth will placate Robb while giving the new Lannister host in Lannisport time to get up and running. Before leaving the gate, Tyrion explains to Sir Jesselyn that the Pyromancers will be dropping off empty jars at the city gates. He instructs Sir Jesselyn to fill them first with green paint, then graduate to lit lamp oil, and have his men train on launching them without any spillage. Anybody who spills is thrown out. It's not to be trusted anymore. When that's mastered, they might just be ready for wildfire.
As Tyrion makes his way back to the Red Keep, his litter is held up by commotion caused by a prophet ranting on the state of the world. He's surprisingly accurate in his account of the royals and other highborn lords, and tells the crowd the comet signifies a reckoning. While his litter moves on, Tyrion feels more hopeful than when he woke this morning. All he needs is time to put the pieces together. And when he finally reaches the Tower of the Hand, he's greeted in his chambers ever so lovingly by his sister, Queen Cersei.
The Queen is furious, having learned that Tyrion plans to send Myrcella to Dorne to be a ward of Prince Doran Martell until she's old enough to marry his son, Tristan. With that, Tyrion realizes who's informed on him to Cersei. Tyrion explains that Myrcella is safer in Dorne than in King's Landing, where her head is increasingly likely to end up on a spike. At this, Cersei begins to weep. The sight stuns Tyrion. He moves to console her, but is rebuffed. The conversation takes a more civil tone, and Tyrion explains that their father's army is in good position to protect them at Harrenhal. He keeps the two Stark armies from rejoining, keeps both from King's Landing, and can move quickly to King's Landing should Renly's host ever bother to arrive. Finally, he says that they're clearly winning the war, or Robb Stark wouldn't have just sued for peace. At this, Cersei snaps back into queen mode and wants to see the letter. Tyrion consents that he'll get his Dornish marriage.
Uh-huh. Man, Tyrion chapters, lately especially, have just been packed with talking points and interesting things.
Yeah, it's like all of the story exposition goes on in the Tyrion one,
Yeah.
so that the whole thing moves along.
Kind of like the way it used to in a Game of Thrones with Ned chapters.
Yeah.
Ned was always kind of the central figure
you know
around
why
the
it
big
is.
things in the world.
Yeah, it's because King's Landing is the hub. It's
Right.
it's your POV character in King's Landing who isn't Sansa.
Right. Yes. As long as yes, the children's. Well, I mean, Arya's chapters can be very tense,
but they're not. They're very tense, but they're not the big story.
Right.
They're not the big picture.
Yes,
They
they're
are
the boots on the
her
ground
woes.
picture.
Yeah.
No, so this chapter starts off. Tyrion's down in the Guildhall of the Alchemists, and he was told to dress warmly. It's very cold down there, and he's wearing this shadow skin cloak. And just a quick reminder where that came from is Marillion, the singer, took that off of a dead clansman while they were traveling through the Mountains of the Moon on their way to the Eyrie, and then Tyrion won it off Marillion while dicing. So that's how he ended up with that cloak of his. That's way too big for him.
Yeah, they're being shown around by Hallyne, who, if you remember, was part of Cersei's retinue in the last Tyrion chapter when she was off to she was going to inspect the defences, right? That's where she was headed.
Yeah.
You called them alchemists there. Are they alchemists or pyromancers, or is that used interchangeably?
It's called the Guildhall of the Alchemists, but Pyromancer and Alchemist, I guess they use kind of interchangeably.
Right, okay. So the main thing that the alchemists do, I mean, we perhaps would think of alchemists as being turning base metals into gold, but the main thing that the alchemists, pyromancers, do in Westeros is they make wildfire. This is their secret that they don't share with anyone. It's supposed to be very complicated, and it's very precious. Thoros of Myr uses it. Remember, Thoros of Myr fights with a flaming sword. Basically, he dips the sword in wildfire and then sets it alight. It destroys the sword over the course of the battle, but it burns for more than an hour, so he's got time to do some damage with it. You probably might be better off actually with like a flicking device with wildfire on it rather than a sword.
Right. Yes.
Like one of those things you throw a tennis ball to a dog.
Right. Just a bucket of wildfire.
Yeah, just
flinging it.
Bucket of burning wildfire.
That's a good point.
I'm pretty terrified of Thoros of Myr anyway. I'd be terribly terrified of him like that.
Even if
he'd be dangerous from a distance.
He could dip a mace in wildfire and swing that thing around. That would shoot it out as well, I guess.
Keeping a bucket of burning wildfire in your hand during a battle might be a little bit complicated.
Yeah, there's definitely some flaws to that plan. Although the pyromancers do take pretty good safety measures when it comes to storing and creating wildfire.
I'm going to guess thousands of years of experience of them all getting burned to death has taught them to be careful.
That might have something to do with it. Yeah, trial and error.
Yeah.
What they do is, so they create the wildfire. They're alchemists. Their apprentice create the wildfire in an empty stone chamber, and above each stone chamber is a room full of sand with what what Hallyne calls a spell on the roof or the ceiling or floor, depending on which room you're in. And if something goes wrong with the creation of the wildfire, the ceiling collapses and dumps sand, fills the room below with sand. Of course, it also kills the careless alchemist, as Tyrion points out.
Probably the alchemist was in big trouble once the wildfire had started burning.
That's true.
Probably not that bothered by the falling roof and ceiling and sand.
And Tyrion, of course, thinks that it's likely that when Hallyne says spell, what he really means is clever trick. And I think it's because Tyrion, his rational mind can't really accept the idea of spells, just like he couldn't believe that Mormont and the other members of the Night's Watch are guarding against anything but Grumpkins and Snarks at the wall.
Of course, Grumpkins and Snarks could just be like, people who've evolved slightly differently, sort of like a race of smaller people or something like that. So they could be believable in that sense, but certainly a magic spell holding a ceiling in place does seem like I'd be skeptical too, especially when there are practical things that you could do to make that ceiling fall in the event of a horribly hot fire burning underneath it. For instance, nothing at all.
It's just going to fall. At some point, it's going to fall.
Or, a complicated system of, wax-filled screws, something like that.
When the temperature gets too hot.
just a wooden ceiling would do it.
Yes, there you go. That's the trick, wooden ceiling.
Wooden ceiling.
Now, we don't hear a whole lot about magic and spells and stuff, especially in Westeros. Mirri Mazdor's blood magic in the Dany chapters in Essos are about as close as we get, but there are a few places in Westeros that are at least said to have spells that cast protection on them, such as the Wall is said to have spells to keep things like the Others out, and Storm's End is actually said to have a protection spell on it. So
didn't really save Robert and Stannis and Renly's parents, did it?
No, I guess they didn't make it inside. They had to make it inside the castle. I see. Maybe.
Yeah.
But apparently they also didn't keep very good tabs on where the wildfire jars went during the sack of King's Landing.
Which I have to say is distinctly at odds with the whole ceiling sand thing,
Right.
That we're really super careful in the making of the wildfire, and then we lose 200 bottles of it.
Right. They found 200 bottles under the Sept of Baelor just recently, which is a rather dangerous situation because, as Hallyne points out, they get more and more
volatile,
fragile as they age. So, but then he also, along those same lines, talking about during the sack of King's Landing, which was the end of King Aerys' reign, he mentions that so many of the masters of the Pyromancer masters were murdered during the sack of King's Landing, and he didn't go into much detail about that, but it makes you wonder, were they murdered for their part in the wildfire plot?
But did the wildfire plot come out at the time?
No, it didn't, because it thankfully never actually happened.
Right.
But I don't know who all knew about it. I don't know how widespread the news was that there's wildfire hidden all over the place, and they're going to blow the city.
It's an interesting thought because the sack of King's Landing was obviously a little bit out of control, courtesy of people like Gregor Clegane. But it's not like the Pyromancer's place is inside Maegor's Holdfast. It's in the city, but it's on a different hill. So it does seem like they wouldn't be swept up in the random orgy of killing.
That's what I was getting at.
If they were murdered, it would feel like it was intentional, that they were known to have been working for Aerys, but...
That's exactly what I'm getting at there. Doesn't seem like they would be running around with swords trying to kill Lannister troops. So...
Right.
Unless... Anyway.
It does make you wonder what I mean, I know the wildfire plot was to blow up all of King's Landing, right? Basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
Why not actually use it a little bit more specifically than that, Have a little bit of it on hand to throw at anyone who comes at you.
Yeah, like basically kind of like what Tyrion proposed here, but on a smaller scale. You mean like an individual scale. Right, yes.
Have your Kingsguard have a couple of flasks of it in convenient places.
Sure.
That they could use should, Of course, one of those Kingsguard did turn out to be the guy who killed you, so that wouldn't have helped.
So that wouldn't help.
would have actually given him an easier way to do it, I suppose. So Hallyne is confident that he'll reach 10,000 jars as commissioned. Tyrion thinks that only if the enemies give them enough time, but Renly does seem to be accommodating.
Yeah, I mean, these Baratheon brothers are really making a mess of this whole thing. If they had acted in coordination and swiftly, King's Landing would have fallen, and there'd be plenty of men between the two of them to defend against anything Tywin can bring. So, and then you make concessions with Robb, or you deal with him one-on-one. I mean, if Renly really is bringing 100,000, even 80,000, even 50,000 troops from the Reach and the Stormlands, and Stannis is pulling together a sizable sea, navy. I mean, there's not much Robb could do at that point, you know?
Sea army.
Sea army, yes, that's it. So they're really making a mess of this. I blame it all on Renly primarily because he has...
Yeah, Renly's got... He has his fate in his own hands. Stannis is beholden to the fact that he doesn't have enough troops to do much yet.
Right.
But they could coordinate, and that's every bit as much Stannis' fault as Renly's.
Yeah. Yes, Stannis is not going to be the one to go to Renly and say, hey, team up with me, because he's the rightful heir, and it should be his younger brother coming to him.
Yeah. Hallyne says that Tyrion's the first Hand of the King to visit the Alchemists since Rossart, who was Aerys' last Hand of the King, who we've mentioned it before. He only lasted 2 weeks as Hand of the King.
Yes.
Before the sack of King's Landing. But Rossart was an alchemist, right?
He was the Grand Master of
Hallyne mentions that he was one of their own. So perhaps that's the connection. Perhaps that's why, because the Hand of the King was one, it was assumed that everybody in that order was loyal to Aerys.
Right, that could be.
Yeah.
Now, Rossart was... he succeeded Carlton Chesteld, who we mentioned in that same Tyrion chapter, which I think was Tyrion 1 of Clash of Kings. He was burned alive by wildfire when he protested Aerys' plot to destroy King's Landing via wildfire. So, a lot of wildfire plots going on here.
Yeah. The more you hear about it, the more you realise how mad any such plot is, because the thing is desperately dangerous.
Yes.
But I guess if your plan is to burn everything, then it's pretty useful for that.
It's doing exactly what you want.
If it goes wrong, it just happens too soon. As well.
Right. Well, that was 10 minutes earlier than I wanted.
Exactly.
So we get more mob of small folk gathered at the gates of the Red Keep, chanting for food. And of course, our benevolent king, what does he do but launches arrows at them and kills 4, and then shouts down that he gives them his leave to eat their dead. So, not a great PR move, just more disastrous public relations for the royals.
So you thought this was a separate incident than the one in the last Sansa chapter? I just assumed it was the same incident as the last Sansa chapter.
I took it as a second one, yes. Okay. Because the first one he wrote out.
Yes, I did think that, but then I thought perhaps they got to a certain distance and then shot arrows from there.
Yeah, could be. I took it as a separate incident, but it very well could have been the same. Either way, wasn't a good move.
Yeah. So when he leaves the Alchemists, he sees Bronn. Bronn's come with messages. He's got 2 summons. One from, as he describes him, Ironhand, who is Sir Jesselyn Bywater, which, if you remember, he lost that hand in the Siege of Pike.
Yep.
And that's where he was knighted, right?
Yes, he was knighted because of that, yep.
Because of that. And Cersei, well, to be fair to Cersei, her summons was not a lot more peremptory than Jesselyn Bywater's, but I guess Tyrion knew he wanted to go to Jesselyn Bywater. He certainly didn't want to go to Cersei, right. So he left her hanging. In fact, he didn't just leave her hanging, because he said, I want her angry and therefore stupid. He actually sends Bronn back to tell her that he'll be there in his own good time, right. Just to add to the anger. If I were Bronn, I'd be like, it's going to cost you.
Right, yeah, if I'm the one to have to deliver that message.
Yeah.
And we have seen examples of her getting angry and making stupid decisions, like how she lost her cool with Stannis' letter and wanted to have anyone who mentions the incestuous thing have their tongues ripped out. So luckily cooler heads prevailed there.
Yeah. I mean, it might have worked. It's a big ask, anyone who says that.
There'd be a lot of tongues floating around around Flea Bottom, I guess.
So Tyrion meets up with Jacelyn Bywater, and he introduces him to Sir Cleos Frey. Sir Cleos Frey is a first cousin. No, is that right? Is she a first cousin of Tyrion? He's a first cousin of Tyrion through his mother, Jenna Lannister. Jenna Lannister being Tywin's sister.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the Riverlands are a mess. Not entirely surprisingly, the River Lords are burning their own crops, apparently. But I'm skeptical about that. The River Lords might want to starve the Lannisters out, but the Lannisters seem to be burning the crops on their behalf anyway. So.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody's out there burning food. Winter is coming.
That's right. What do you need all that harvest for? I hadn't thought about the fact that could be misinformation, because I was thinking that news, if the refugees get that news, they might be a little less one-sided in their views toward the Lannisters and the River Lords, and probably just start to hate all Highborns equally if their own lords are burning their crops. But maybe the Lannisters are getting that misinformation out to try and cause a rift.
And perhaps Sir Cleos is not actually intentionally spreading misinformation. He's just heading through the Riverlands, seeing the trouble, and just assuming it's not his side that's doing it.
Oh, yeah, it could be. Yeah. He might just be
but I'm sure Tyrion will run with it. I'm sure Tyrion will say, yes, that's right.
That's what's happening.
The River Lords are burning your food. That's why you've got nothing.
Yeah.
Cleos presents the letter with Robb's demands. Tyrion looks at them and says that they're completely unacceptable, of course. Cleos suggests that they exchange the Stark girls for his kid brother. And I was like... You do remember that Jaime Lannister is a captive of the North.
Right.
I feel like your kid brother is not going to be high on the list of important people to free.
Imagine Tyrion coming to Cersei. We couldn't get Jaime, but we did get Tyrion Frey. So, almost as good, right? Now, Tyrion Frey is the third son of Aemon Frey and Jenna Lannister. The other captive is Willem Lannister, which is Kevin's second son, Lancel's younger brother.
Okay.
Now, he is not to be confused with Cleos' second son, Willem Frey. There's a Willem Lannister and a Willem Frey.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And both of
both Tyrion Frey and Willem Lannister were taken at the Whispering Woods, right?
Yes. Yeah. And Kat did point out that there was no way Cersei trades the Stark girls for a pair of cousins, and clearly she was right. I think we knew that going in, though.
Right. Well, so Cleos wasn't even bothered about the other cousin. Oh no, he did list them both, didn't he? He did list both cousins.
Yeah, I think so. But Kat, we knew, and Kat mentioned that these demands were too strong, and Kat suggested sweeter terms, and Robb said that these are as sweet as he could get. Just this was making him gag, and that's when Kat realized he wasn't out to actually get peace. He still wants vengeance, just like Rickard Karstark. So,
and it was Rickard Karstark who was not very happy that this letter was sent. He thought this was too much. Right?
He stormed out while Robb was giving this proclamation of what the concessions shall be. But Cleos mentions that the young wolf is idle at Riverrun, and he tells Tyrion he thinks it's because Robb fears his father Tywin. And a lot of it is that Robb is getting some conflicting counsel, in my opinion. He's got Edmure, who wants him to siege Harrenhal. Cat wants him to team up with Renly and have Renly attack King's Landing to draw Tywin out of Harrenhal and allow Robb to either face Tywin's army in the field or destroy Stafford's fledgling army at Lannisport without worrying about Tywin's army coming up behind them. And then Theon told his father in the Theon chapter that Robb plans to ride west to attack Lannisport. and that Theon was going to get the Ironborn ships and attack from the sea. And but we've mentioned before that the sticking point there is getting past the Golden Tooth, because it's very defensible, and Robb would need to get past it in order to get to Lannisport.
Yeah. I do think that Robb has allowed Cleos Frey to be misinformed and a little bit ignorant of what's going on. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't tell him everything, but I think that clearly he's not just idle here. Yeah, sure, he might be facing some uncertainty, but the thing that that Cleos Frey and the rest of the Lannister side don't know is that Robb is aware of the new army being built in Lannisport.
Right.
And that makes a big difference, you see, because if you are unaware of that, you can sit idle at Riverrun and just hope that things change in the war somehow, and then you'll have an easy time of it. If you know about that army, then you've got to do something. And so he's not just sitting idle, he's just debating which action to take at this point.
Right. It doesn't hurt Robb either. It actually helps him that they don't know that he actually is trying to come up with the best plan, not just sitting there idle because he's afraid to move, like Cleos says he is. Yeah. But Tyrion thinks that Robb has given them a golden chance here, and he says, let the boy wait at Riverrun, dreaming of an easy peace. And so his plan is to keep the negotiations going, keep Robb holding tight, with these, giving him just enough of concessions to keep him thinking that they're progressing. But really, what he plans to do is just give that other new Lannister army time to come up to speed, and then that Lannister army will come from the west, Tywin's army will come from the east, and they will crush Robb in the middle at Riverrun. So it seems that really Tyrion has no interest in settling for peace. It's just a means to improve the Lannisters' position in the war.
Well, I think the thing is, you're absolutely correct. Nothing you've said there is incorrect. But the one thing he would sue for peace for is Jaime. But Jaime is the one thing that's scrupulously missing from the peace offer.
Not even mentioned, I don't think, if I remember correctly.
So the thing is, the next best thing for the Lannisters is that they do protract this, keeping this war quiet to give Tywin an opportunity to come south and help them deal with the Baratheon threats. And once that's happened, then he could catch Robb between the hammer and anvil of the two Lannister armies.
Sure, I see what you're saying. It does seem like he's missing out on an opportunity to at least explore real peace without...
Right. Well, there you go. It's a 2-for-1 deal. You send back a thing that says, we'll send you the Stark girls in return for Jaime Lannister. You can have the North, but we get the Riverlands back. Something entirely unacceptable. But hey, if Robb really has grown tired of war and wants peace, he might come close to saying yes to it.
Yeah.
And you get exactly what you want then,
Yeah.
But it's highly unlikely, but that's the thing. Tyrion can't really lose. If it's highly unlikely and he says no, he's got to make a new offer,
Right, in which he's just stalling for time at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah. But, if they did manage to at least make peace with Robb, then first of all, they could possibly get some refugees out of King's Landing if it's safe at all to return to the Riverlands. Food and shelter, of course, would still be a major issue.
It's only not safe because of the Lannisters.
Well, I mean, it's not safe because they've burned all their shelter and their food, so they still might...
The Lannisters!
Yes, yes, definitely because of the Lannisters. I just meant they might not be trying to actively kill them anymore, but they still might starve to death or die from exposure.
We promise not to kill you, but you've got nothing to look forward to.
But you also have no food either. But then, you take care of the situation with Robb, then you're just down to dealing with the Baratheon brothers, reduce the amount of enemies you have to deal with at one time. It wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah. So then Tyrion has a smart idea at this point, I think. He doesn't allow any of Cleos's party to enter the city. He doesn't want word of how bad the conditions are in King's Landing to reach Robb Stark's ear. Now, of course, you could tell Cleos not to say it, but if anyone in it, loose lips sink ships.
Right, yep.
You want to try and keep that under wraps as much as possible.
Yeah, you could definitely see if his enemies knew the powder keg that King's Landing is, they would absolutely try and exploit that, which you could either attack quickly or try and cut off even more food getting into King's Landing.
Or if you're Renly, you just dawdle even more so that they get hungrier and hungrier.
Keep having tourneys and accepting fealty.
It looks like a crossroads to me. Set up the tournament.
Right. Yeah. Tyrion mentioned that much of the food is going to the garrison to feed their troops. If they start to starve, then it's even more dangerous for the Lannisters.
Yeah.
So when he tells Cleos, I'm going to go talk to my sister, and we'll work out something to send you back to River Run with. And then, so on his way out, he stops and tells Sir Jocelyn Bywater his plan for the wildfire preparation. And so he wants the men to start with green pots filled with green paint, and then when they can do that without spilling any of the paint, to graduate to lit lamp oil. And so the plan is to launch wildfire from Spitfires. It seems like one of the primary defensive maneuvers he is preparing.
A Spitfire being some kind of catapult here.
Yeah, some type of large shooting device. Right. Which it certainly seems like a good use of wildfire in such a defense of the city. Seems like you could use it to attack both land and sea, but you definitely want to be well practiced, because one pot blows up in your hands, it blows up the pot next to you and all the ones next to it.
I also think the other reason that that's a good use of the wildfire is because it's throwing it away from the city as much as possible.
And it would work on sea, work on ships and stuff, because water doesn't quench the burning.
Right, so the surface of the sea could catch fire. I mean, obviously you aim at the ships, but if it hits the water, it still burns. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you don't even have to be completely
sail
accurate
into it.
Yeah. But it's surprising that there's been no mention of anyone else ever trying to use this tactic with wildfire. Like, to my knowledge, there is. I'm not aware of it, but it seems like it might be something worth trying. I could certainly see transportation being a problem, because if you hit a bump in the road in your wagon full of wildfire, you could have a real mess. But they did manage to get wildfire all the way down to Summerhall when Aegon V was died trying to what we believe to hatch a dragon egg. But I think the Tyrells and the Redwynes certainly could have used some wildfire to end the siege at Storm's End a lot faster if they would have just been launching wildfire into Storm's End.
That's true. Stannis would have eaten
it. They would have roasted their rats over the flames.
So Tyrion leaves and heads back to the castle, to Maegor's Keep. He overhears his litter takes him past a preacher who's preaching, and he's preaching about the child of incest on the throne, but he's also bought into Baelish's lie about Shireen Baratheon, because he says she's the child of
highborn ladies fornicating with fools or something like that.
Right. So
creating monstrous offspring or something along those lines.
Right. So kudos to Baelish. He got the word out, and he got it into the minds of people who will spread it still further.
Yeah.
So again, suddenly we've got an equivalence where there is no equivalence.
Right. One is true. One is completely fabricated.
Right. But the people just are rebelling against all sort of authority at this point.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised at how in the know this guy was, because he knew both of those stories, the incest story with the Lannisters and the Shireen being a product of Patchface and Selyse Florent, or Selyse Baratheon. But then he also knew that about Robert's penchant for prostitutes, and about the boar killing Robert. You wouldn't think, in this time period, that those kind of details would be widely spread, because there's no real news source. So
a lot of those things you would learn in a brothel. So perhaps this is where he got it all.
Could be.
Because
maybe he's frequented Chataya's himself.
Exactly. Tyrion recalls a joke. The other person that gets criticized by this preacher is the High Septon of the Faith of the Seven, because he criticizes the church, and that's an interesting one because in earlier times, the faith militant rose against the royals. When the royals tried to flout religious teachings, for instance, by having an incestuous relationship and a child thereof, that's the kind of thing that would get the faith going a little bit. And so this feels like a sort of schism in the faith between the people who are comfortably enshrined as high septon and positions of power and the true believers who think that we should fight against the royals who are not worthy of it because they don't follow the codes of the religion.
Right? Yeah, nobody was safe with this guy. He's even blasting his own brethren, technically.
Right.
By blasting the High Septon.
Yeah. Tyrion, at that point, recalls a joke made by Moonboy. If you remember who Moonboy is, he was Robert's fool. But now he's moved into management because he has Sedontus under him. So. I'm glad to see you still cracking a few jokes. That's good. He said the other day that the High Septon is so pious that he eats 7 meals every time he sits at table, which Tyrion thought was funny at the time. So
yes, oh yeah, it's a good thing that Cersei didn't get her way with the whole ripping tongues out for mentioning that the king was a product of incest thing, because this guy would be in some serious trouble here. But I did wonder if maybe this guy was moved to speak due to Joff's recent attacks on the starving smallfolk. Maybe it pushed him over the edge and he felt the need to start speaking out against the royals.
That's a very good point, actually. That is the kind of thing that will foment unrest.
Yeah. So Tyrion, they finally move on past the preacher, and Tyrion just, even though he just listened to, and the guy also calls Tyrion a demon monkey?
Demon monkey?
Yeah. Something. A demon monkey something or other. I can't remember the exact wording.
Demon monkey is what it was. It was demon
something
monkey.
Along those lines. So, but as he rides on past them on his way to the Red Keep, he's actually more hopeful than he was when he woke up this morning. He figures he really just needs time to put all these pieces together and get the city properly defended. And like we said earlier, his enemies are definitely doing their part to help him out there. Because, the longer they wait, the more time to truly prepare and strategize that they're giving Tyrion and, to some degree, Tywin as well.
Something's just occurred to me, actually. The thousands of empty containers that he asked for from Hallyne, he should also practice moving those up to the battlements to where the Spitfires are. It should be the whole thing, make sure everyone can do every single part of this so.
Don't just drop them off at their final destination.
Right.
The clumsy guy that carries the wildfire up the stairs, he drops one.
The guy who spills the green paint is relegated to pushing the cart full of them.
Yeah, that could be a problem. Yeah. But also the hunger and the unrest that we're seeing in the city is just as big a danger as the enemies outside the walls if it gets too much worse here. So time isn't just from his enemies on the outside. He also needs to placate the 500,000 starving small folk as well. So something he needs to consider.
So Cersei's in the Tower of the Hand, and I think she summoned him to her own quarters. So she got impatient while he was gone, and she's lucky he didn't go straight to her, of course, because then they would have missed each other. But
Right.
he, being Tyrion, he thought he'd make her wait even longer by going to the Tower of the Hand, but he found her there. She is angry about the offer of Myrcella to Dorne, where she would be fostered by Dorne and Martell.
Yeah, that's not one of the plans we heard in the last chapter. We heard,
and therefore
Myrcella,
it must be the one that was in the letter.
Yeah, right. We heard Myrcella to the Vale, to Erie, to marry Robert Arryn. And we heard Tommen to Dorne but we never heard Myrcella to Dorne, so that's
Okay.
why it has to have been Pycelle, because that must have been the actual plan.
But then Pycelle didn't know.
Well, he must have peeked at the letter, though.
But remember, he came back anxious to know what was in the letter.
He did.
Was he just acting?
Anxious. That's a very good point. Yeah, he did come back anxious.
You see, when the plan was hatched, I was annoyed about that. I thought it was wrong. You had to give him some clues as to what was in the letter. Now, maybe you're right. Maybe he totally looked at that. The thing is, what I would say is, this actually doesn't absolve Varys. Because Varys figured out that that's what was in the letter, if you remember.
But he figured out, he was under the impression it was Tommen.
But I thought it was both. I thought it was both.
It was Myrcella going to the Vale, Tommen going to Dorne.
Oh, I see. He'd spied and got Baelish's news, and then figured out that it must be Tommen to the... I see. Okay, so, I mean, obviously, Pycelle looked at the letter, and then is a really good actor.
I guess so.
I would be doubly afraid of him. He's not only a spy for Cersei, but he also can really act.
He has Varys level acting skills.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, when Tyrion tells Cersei the rest of the offer, the stuff that Varys knew, she doesn't act like she knew that information already. So it seems like it must have been only Pycelle. Because maybe all three of them had gone to her and given her little bits. But it doesn't seem like she knew anything else except for the Myrcella to Dorne part. So,
but as we said at the time, her loyal subjects have a duty to tell her about plots.
Yep. I'm nodding over here. Yes. That's the exact same thing I had. Does he have an obligation to inform her of such news? She is the Queen Regent. You know, the Hand can say, don't tell anyone, but technically I believe the Queen Regent trumps the Hand of the King. I guess it's a little bit muddled.
Yeah, but I guess he didn't have to look at the letter. He could have not looked at the letter and told Cersei, you know, Tyrion had me send an interesting looking letter to Prince Doran Martell. I don't know what was in it, but
you might
thought I should let you know.
Yeah, but Pycelle would have just outed himself here, though, because he'd have to know that Cersei is then going to take this information to Tyrion. So, so he basically
this is not like
himself.
This is not like breaking the Enigma code where we pretend we don't have it for years and years.
Right.
I'm going to tell you something, Cersei, but you can't act on it.
Right? Yeah, that's not going to work.
Straight round to the Tower of the Hand.
Yeah.
So Cersei's absolutely mortified. She thinks that Tyrion has offered way too much. But Tyrion points out that Prince Doran has lots of reasons to hate the Lannisters, and therefore to get him on their side is going to take a lot.
Yep.
You can't offer him nothing and expect him to join with you, so grand gestures are needed. So Myrcella's hand to Tristan, which is, you know, I mean, that seals the two families together. Some castles.
They're Tristan and Myrcella, Tristan is 11, she's 9. They're a lot closer in age, and it's definitely a lot, seems like anyway, we don't know the Martells yet, but it seems like a lot better option than Robert Arryn.
Yeah, I mean
that one made me nervous.
There's worse than Robert Arryn. There's Joffrey Baratheon.
Yes.
But those are two kind of extremes, and if Tristan is anywhere in between those two, he's a million times better than either of them.
Right. Yes. And we don't know what his mother may or may not be like, but she can't be a whole lot worse than what Liza Arryn would be like as a foster mother and then mother-in-law.
So also some castles in the Marches, so basically extending Dorne a little bit into the sort of Baratheon and Tyrell territory. A seat on the small council, and Elia Martell's murderer, who we believe to be Gregor Clegane.
Yes.
With possibly Armory Lorch involved as well. But we're not.
Yeah, they haven't mentioned him, but you know, we have been led to believe that he was also involved in the murder of her and her children. Yeah. But yeah, Cersei's convinced this is just way too much.
Yeah.
But Tyrion, on the other hand, is concerned it might not be enough.
Yeah, but he reassures himself with the one thing that their beef with the Lannisters only goes back one generation, whereas the Martells have been fighting with the Baratheons and the Tyrells for thousands of years, basically.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I know what you're going to say, because for me it's the same. What you did to my ancestors, I can turn a blind eye
Yes.
to. What you did to me,
exactly.
I remember.
Yes.
It, and it burns.
Yeah. Thousands of years of fighting over the Dornish marches. Dornish marches definitely would have some ingrained bad blood, just like culturally. But it's been like 100 years since there was any major conflict between Dorne and any of the other kingdoms. But this family murdered in cold blood his sister and his niece and nephew. I mean, that's definitely something that is personal. That's a personal vendetta against a family. So I feel like you'd need to factor that in.
Oh yeah. I'm 100% with you here. I think it's which is why Tyrion needs to go big on this. And maybe this is big enough. I mean, first of all, having the murderer's head on a plate is a big step, you know. And also, if I was Gregor Clegane reading this book, I would be like, well, that's not very nice, is it? I did what you wanted. Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking, good luck hand delivering the mountain to Sunspear. I'm wondering how they pull that one off. I guess they send them there like, we need you to do a mission in Sunspear.
What you do is you say, his name is Gregor Clegane. He's yours.
Go find him. Do whatever you want. Good luck.
Don't come to me crying.
But he says that Renly has taken the Martell's support for granted, and I wondered why that is and why Tyrion believes that to be, because both have to know the regional history between the two. So you would think Renly would have, at least opened some kind of communication with Dorne if he thinks it's necessary. Maybe he doesn't even think they're necessary.
Oh, well, I don't think the Dorne is necessary to Renly's ambitions. It's necessary to Renly's ambitions that Dorne doesn't come down on the side of the Lannisters.
Yes,
but I think he thinks he's safe from that because of Elia Martell's murder.
Yes.
He's not even thinking that they would. You couldn't offer them enough to make them turn to the Lannisters' side. Nothing at all.
Tyrion says, "I think otherwise."
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, I guess it's another example of Renly not really being suited for being a king, because a king should be thinking, I need to make sure my enemy doesn't get any other allies.
But Tyrion doesn't know. It's quite possible, and in fact very sensible of Renly, to have sent an emissary to Dorne to say, look, I'm not going to ask you to come and fight for us. You guys have got your own, you've got the sunshine. You want to just hang around here. That's fine. Totally get it. You stay out of it. I promise I will get rid of the Lannisters, and if I can, I'm going to find the murderer and send him your way.
Yes, he should absolutely have done that. And you're right. I don't know that Tyrion would know whether or not he's done that already.
Right. He would not, I feel confident. Tyrion also argues that Myrcella will be safer in Dorne than in King's Landing, that the chances of her head ending up on a spike next to Cersei's are growing with every day.
Yes.
Whereas he's confident that the Martells wouldn't hurt her. And that, typically that's the way people behave here. They take these wards, hostages in and look after them, like the young Greyjoy at Winterfell.
And if he's confident that the Martells aren't going to hurt her, he's certainly right. I think it is getting incredibly dangerous for to be in King's Landing, and maybe Cersei should consider getting both Myrcella and Tommen out of town. She's got all three of her children in one castle here that's surrounded by enemies, and 500,000 hungry, scared, disgruntled small folk inside the walls. So
who we know have turned to cannibalism already, courtesy of Joffrey.
Because Joffrey said they could. Then Tyrion says that the Martells are likely to treat Myrcella better than Joffrey treated Sansa. God, I'd hope so.
Yeah, if I were Cersei, just hearing that thought would make me keep her at home.
Yeah.
Like,
Could it be close? But
is
that
it even close? 10% she's not going. So Cersei cries at the mention of Myrcella's head on a spike, which is truly startling to Tyrion. Hasn't seen her cry since she was a child.
yeah. I kind of first wondered if maybe she was using tears to play on his emotions to get what she wanted, but it doesn't seem so because she didn't really gain anything from it.
Yeah.
I think she was just truly scared for her kid's safety. And
exactly. That's how I saw that as well. But hey, I thought Pycelle hadn't read the letter.
What do we know?
So Tyrion then describes to Cersei the state of the war, and he's pretty accurate with it, but it's all basically his own guesswork and supposition, really. I mean,
right.
Yes, he's got some new information from Cleos Frey and what have you, but there's a couple of things he says which I'm not sure will work out exactly as he describes. He thinks that Harrenhal is sufficiently close to the Trident to prevent Robb and Roose Bolton from reuniting. I think if Robb comes sweeping down from Riverrun, he sweeps everything out of his path to the walls of Harrenhal.
Right. Yeah, nothing's going to put up unless Tywin puts out a force to face him.
Right.
Nothing's
which
going
is
to
basically
stop
then
him.
You've taken away the advantage of Harrenhal, because the whole point of Harrenhal is you hide behind those walls.
Right.
So I don't think Tyrion's right about that. I mean, it's a fair distance to the Trident. It's tens of miles. It's not right next door to Harrenhal.
Right.
So I'm not sure he's right about that. And he thinks, as we've said, that he thinks the current impasse is working for the Lannisters because of Stafford Lannister's growing army back at Lannisport. But he is unaware that Robb already knows about that, and so he's making his own plans.
Right.
So overall, I think he's got a pretty good grasp of what's going on, but he is making some assumptions that I don't think quite hold up.
I agree, yes. He does explain why it makes sense for Tywin to stay in Harrenhal versus coming to King's Landing, because he is close enough to protect King's Landing from Renly, and he's close enough to Riverrun to react to anything Robb does. But no matter which way Tywin moves, he puts himself in some trouble, because if he moves towards King's Landing, then Roose and Robb can hook up and pin Tywin's army against Renly's army if Renly's coming up from the south, and the walls of... I guess they would just go into King's Landing at that point, but if he moves west towards Robb, then Roose could come from the south and move in behind him and pin him between Robb and Roose. Yeah. So,
although again, I don't think Roose's army can be all that much now. I mean, it was only a fraction of Robb's overall force, and it was pretty badly decimated at the battle on the Greenfall.
You're right. It was the bigger of the two chunks of army.
Oh, it was bigger, was it? I thought it was smaller.
It was the bigger portion, but it was all foot.
All foot soldiers, that's right.
Yeah.
You're right.
But what if Robb goes west, like Theon says, and then Roose brings troops across the Twins to hold Riverrun? You know?
Right, yeah.
Tywin would be basically helpless to stop Robb's force marching on King's Land, Castle Rock and Lannisport, or they'd have to come down the King's Road, take the Gold Road across to the west, which would take a really long time. So at that point, they might as well just move to King's Landing and hold that city for all it's worth. So, yeah, I don't think it's quite as rosy as Tyrion made it out, but he's also trying to console his sister a bit too. So.
Right, but he is right that as long as Tywin stays put, he's within striking distance of helping King's Landing in need. But if he moves before he has to, then he invites, exactly what you said, Robb and Roose to come and squeeze him from the north, which they can't do while he's holed up in Harrenhal. As soon as he leaves Harrenhal, they can do it. But if he can get a jump on them, he can come and help King's Landing at their moment of need.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So Tyrion thinks that when Renly arrives, that's exactly what will happen. His father will shoot down the King's Road, hammer Renly's force against the walls of King's Landing.
Yeah, but looking at a map, the Rose Road meets King's Landing on the south side of the Blackwater Rush. So either army would need to ford the Blackwater Rush for them to meet up.
I would assume that Renly would try to surround the city, though, to stop anyone escaping.
But he'd still have to get across the river, though. Because...
Right, but he's probably spent some of the time building his tournament stadiums in pulling together enough materials to build a quick bridge.
Right. Like yes. But, if it came to a clash, even if Tywin has 20,000, I mean, we don't know what Renly has, but estimates as high as 100, even if he's only got 50,000, that's a pretty formidable force. So that could be a problem here.
Yeah, but a crowded 50,000 with blobs of flaming wildfire landing on you could be quite a bad scene.
Yes, that
could
be
during this whole scene, Cersei slaps Tyrion a couple of times, and he vows that she won't do that again. Cersei then threatens him a bit more sinisterly. She says that he's only appointed Hand of the King by paper from her father, and Ned Stark had a piece of paper too. Yep. Tyrion reassures himself. He's got the gold cloaks, he's got his clansmen, he's got the sellswords that Bronn's hiring. But then he thinks to himself, well, Ned probably thought he was safe too. So
yeah.
It's a sobering thought there.
Indeed. But the one thing that Tyrion has that Ned didn't have is that, unlike Ned, he put his own man in charge of the gold cloaks. So, that's one major difference, is that Ned just trusted that the commander of the gold cloaks was going to be honorable and trustworthy.
Yeah. Background.
So as we learn in this chapter, the Alchemist Guild is even older than the Citadel of the Maesters. Although oddly, there's not much info about them prior to the Targaryen dynasty. However, there are alchemist guilds in Essos, so maybe they're counting those guilds in their years of existence. But that being said, though, there's no mention of any association between the guilds in Essos with those on Westeros, so I'm not exactly sure how it all works out. But anyway, here's a few examples of the Targaryens using pyromancers. In his quest to conquer Dorne, Aegon IV Targaryen demanded that his pyromancers create dragons using those vast secret stores of knowledge that they claim to have. What the alchemists came up with were 7 large contraptions that spewed jets of wildfire by way of pumps. It all ended in disaster, though, when one of the contraptions caught fire. It took out the other 6, along with a quarter of the Kingswood, which is where they were testing them. So that didn't work out so well.
By the way, testing flying machines in a wood, especially flaming flying machines, is a terrible, terrible idea.
Good point. Probably should have tried that somewhere a little less wooded.
But the Wright brothers went to Kitty Hawk, right?
Yes.
It was a big sandy, flat area. That seems like the better place for that kind of thing.
Yeah. See, you should have been a pyromancer. You would have steered them straight. Other kings have tried wildfire over the years. During the Great Spring Sickness, Daeron II's Hand of the King, Brandon Rivers, had pyromancers gather the corpses of the dead in the dragon pit and burn them using wildfire. And as I think we've mentioned before, it's believed that pyromancers and wildfire played a part in Aegon V, otherwise known as Egg, in his death at Summerhall. Actually, we just mentioned that earlier. In what appears to have been an attempt to hatch some dragon eggs. His brother Aerion Brightflame also died by drinking wildfire in an attempt to turn himself into a dragon. I know we've mentioned that before.
We have.
And
I
then,
always mention Aerion Brightflame.
And then we get to Aerys II, the Mad King. He developed quite the love affair with wildfire and grew very close to his pyromancers. As far back as 282, King Aerys gave the pyromancers the job of stopping winter. The plan they executed was to burn wildfire along the walls of the Red Keep for a month. Doesn't seem like that would work, but in their defense...
would keep it warm?
Right. The Red Keep might have felt like winter was over. Yeah. In their defense, though, we know that winter lasted into 282, but by 284 it was summer. So maybe it was their efforts that brought it to an end after all.
Yes.
Unlikely, but you never know. And as Tyrion pointed out, Aerys also used wildfire to burn his enemies alive, which is certainly a pastime that Joffrey would enjoy. Now, a few facts. The Alchemist Guild is led by a wisdom, which is what they refer to their full-fledged members of the Alchemist Guild, is led by a wisdom known as the Grand Master. Now, the only specifically mentioned Grand Master is Rossart, although it does sound like Hallyne is a Grand Master as well, because he seems to be the leader of this Alchemist Guild, which is what makes a Grand Master. And unlike their rivals, the Maesters, members of the Alchemist Guild apparently don't take a vow of celibacy, because, as Hallyne mentions in this chapter, his father and his grandfather were both pyromancers.
Well, if they take it, they don't take it very seriously.
Right. It's just a thing they say.
So, comparison with the television show. Tyrion learns of the wildfire from Lancel Lannister, who Tyrion is coercing into being a spy for him with Cersei. So basically, Cersei cooked up the plan with Hallyne to make all of these wildfire, but she didn't tell Tyrion about it, and he got that information from Lancel Lannister. The scene with Hallyne is pretty similar, although Bronn is present, giving snarky comments about charlatans trying to sell super weapons to armies. Hallyne gives as good as he gets. Both Tyrion and Bronn are pretty awed by the sight of 7,000 plus pots of it. There's no mention of aging wildfire, nor of caches showing up randomly around the city, nor of Tyrion taking empty jars for training. Bronn and Tyrion are walking leisurely through the city when they hear the preacher. There seems to be quite a lot of commerce and activity around them, which is a bit out of step with the book, I think. The people seem to be buying and selling things.
Right.
The scene with Cersei precedes these other scenes, rather than coming after them, and contains some future spoilers, which I won't mention. But weirdly, she relegates the kidnap of her daughter to Dorne to like third on her agenda, which seems like it would be the first thing she would talk about.
Which she did in the book, right?
Yeah. She's not that mad and does not cry. Instead, she drinks rather too much, more than Tyrion does, in fact, which is a slight deviation.
It's one way. By the way, Hallyne in the TV show is played by none other than Roy Dotrice.
Oh, really? The guy
voice.
Who voices the audiobooks.
Does the audiobooks,
right. Pedantry. Why send Sir Cleos to King's Landing? As soon as he arrived, I was like, why did you send him to King's Landing? Why not just send him to Harrenhal? You've literally walked past the organ grinder to go talk to the monkeys. Tywin Lannister, a demon monkey. Tywin Lannister is in charge, and Cleos nearly got killed trying to take this message past where it needed to go to.
Could have been done so much faster too.
Right, and that's the thing. The Lannisters are loving this delay. It's helping them no end.
Yes, lots of delays, and it's all helping the Lannisters, who are so precariously situated. Yeah, good point.
That's my
I like that pedantry.
News and notes. Sorry.
News and notes. Well, I don't have any news, but I do have a note that I came across. In 2011, Roy Dotrice set a world record for most character voices in an audiobook for his work on A Game of Thrones.
Do you know what? I think the one he did best was probably the Pyromancer Hallyne. I bet he nailed that one.
Was Hallyne in the first book? I can't recall if he...
Oh, was it just for the first book?
It's just for the first book, yes. I can't... You're right.
Hallyne was...
in the second, in this one now, in Clash of Kings, I'm sure it is definitely the best voice that he does. Any guess on how many voices, distinct individual voices he did in A Game of Thrones?
I think this must have been in the notes earlier and you've taken it out to make this a game, because I have a feeling I know the answer.
Okay, let's see. I might have.
I'm going to say 75.
No, you definitely underestimate the capabilities of one Roy Dotrice. 224 voices.
Of course, because he has to do every minor character. It's not like...
Yes, anyone that speaks, anyone that has a line.
224.
Yeah.
I wonder if he had like a color coding for them.
He must. He must have some way of keeping it straight in his head, because that's insane amount of voices to keep right.
Yeah. What does this one sound like? This one sounds like a Geordie bricklayer.
Now, as I learned this, I've always had a little issue with his sometimes, which I do it all the time, so I can't very well criticize him for it, but I'm also not getting paid, so
Very much so.
He sometimes mispronounces names in such things, and that can be a little distracting at times.
Is it mispronunciation, or is it just a pronunciation you don't agree with?
Both. Sometimes, I swear, sometimes he calls Joffrey Jeffrey on occasion, but he also uses pronunciations like Peter Baelish is Petire Baelish.
Oh, Petire.
Yes.
That actually makes a bit more sense than Petire.
Petire. Anyway, you want to read the review?
No, you can read the review this time.
All right. Well, our review is from Super Pickalord, I think, from Apple Podcast Latvia. And it's titled Amazing Podcast. So that's good. A very good podcast, amazing hosts, and very useful for reading through A Song of Ice and Fire. And the witty banter is hilarious.
Thank you. That's very
At least
nice.
one person feels that way.
All right, let's conclude because we're way over time. The wildfire plan is a good one if they can avoid burning down the city in the process.
Yeah, it's also a good plan to keep Joffrey away from the wildfire.
Very much so. Very much so. I might give him a thimble every Christmas.
There's going to be burnt hair carcasses galore.
Yeah.
I might not be able to shoot that one with a crossbow, but dang it, I can catch it on fire.
I missed with the crossbow, but it was dipped in wildfire. Now the whole lawn is ablaze.
Right. Yeah. But it's good that Tyrion made the trip to check on the wildfire situation because, he might have hatched a plan here.
Some credit to Cersei here. She hatched this plan. Tyrion has taken over this plan. Now, his plan does add a few safety measures, such as practice, but
right, yeah.
She did start the ball rolling, and if she had not started the ball rolling, there wouldn't be 7,000 jars of it ready to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. They'd only have the 4,000 from...
all of which were volatile and dangerous.
Yes. Keep those for backup.
Yeah. King's Landing is a powder keg. It's getting more and more unstable, not just because of the wildfire. Joffrey killing and taunting the starving people's not helping.
No.
Prophets speakingly openly against the royals and the faith in the streets.
Yeah, it's turning into a real situation. It's not good. Definitely not good.
Yeah.
And
increasingly dangerous too. Increasingly dangerous that unrest might spill into open rebellion against the royals.
It feels like that's a definite possibility here.
Yeah.
But Tyrion thinks he just needs time, and his enemies are doing their best to oblige. Yeah, now,
thank you, Renly.
He might get the time from his enemies. I'm not sure he's going to get the time from the 500,000 small folk who are starting to really bubble up here inside the walls. But his enemies
they are running out of time.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, he seems happy to not actually really sue for peace, just to keep the peace negotiations going long enough that the Lannisters can regroup and win the war, basically.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to really see this as... Yes, we all knew that these peace terms that Robb sent were not acceptable, but at least it was a starting overture. He's not looking at it that way so much as, I'm just going to keep him hoping that we're going to reach peace. Really, I'm just giving my side more time to get prepared. Yeah. But then Tyrion also knows what we had already known, and that's Pycelle is Cersei's man.
Yeah. But he didn't really do that much wrong. He may have sneaked a peek at a letter, but he did provide information that the Queen Regent should have known about to the Queen Regent.
Yes, I agree with that. And the plan to marry Myrcella to Trystane makes sense. It does. We haven't met the Martell family yet, like I said earlier, but we do know the Arryns. And not only is he closer in age, Trystane, to Myrcella, but his mother might not be a raving unhinged loon. So
yes, might not be. And it's a major olive branch to turn the royal princess over to their care and family. And if Gregor gets hand-delivered for vengeance purposes, that might seal the deal.
Yeah, good luck hand-delivering the mountain.
Yeah. As always, you can reach us at ghost.harrenhall@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Ghost Harrenhall. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Discord.
And if you wouldn't mind going out and leaving us a 5-star rate and or a glowing review, we certainly would appreciate that, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. We're really trying to grow our presence there. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please just take a second and swipe over to 5 stars. We'd greatly appreciate that. And if you take the time to leave us a review, we'd appreciate that as well. And hey, if you leave us a review, we might read it on a future episode.
We surely will. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.